Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Houston Media Sources Public Affairs Public Access Program. My name is Fran Watson. My pronouns are she and her. And today we're talking about a local social welfare organization. Social welfare organizations are nonprofits that are meant to exist for the common good. And these organizations can benefit a specific community or a community or society, in fact, at large. And for the past 40 years, the Houston GLBT Political Caucus, or widely known in Houston as simply the Caucus, has been working to advocate for and advance the rights of the LGBTQ community in the greater Houston area. As a former caucus president, I'll be joining a roundtable discussion today with two other former caucus presidents, as well as the current caucus president, to talk about the caucus's history, its mission, its impact, and also the special initiatives that make up who the caucus is today. So before we get started, I just want to make sure that I invite you to join the conversation. You can call in with questions or comments at 713-807-1794. That's 713-807-1794. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to the current president of the caucus, Mike Webb. Mike?
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We also have our amazing former president, Maria Gonzalez, from the year 2005, and another amazing former caucus president, Chris Banks, from 2009. And let's just get started, because we only have an hour.
Yeah.
And so the first question that I know I have is, for those who may not be familiar with our organization, would we like to enlighten them?
I'll take that. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Fran. The organization was founded in 1975, and I'll just read the mission statement. We've had this for years now. Founded in 1975, the Houston GLBT Political Caucus is dedicated to eliminating prejudice, violence, and injustice against gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people through education, activism, and political advocacy. Our goal is to create a world where all human beings are guaranteed freedom, equality, and opportunity. And the way the caucus has always tried to get this done is by being politically active. What they basically do is they screen and endorse progressive, pro-LGBT policies, candidates, and sometimes LGBT candidates themselves, as well as get out their endorsements in an endorsement card. But the real power of the caucus has always been in its disciplined voters. It's always had the list, as it is known. It's always worked on this list from the very beginning. Don Rockaby, the second president of the caucus, invented this list late 70s, early 80s, basically punch cards, getting names and addresses, and just generating year after year after year disciplined voters who vote the endorsement card. 1975, many years ago, and we still have the same basic process. We screen and endorse candidates, we develop an endorsement roster, and then we get it out to progressive voters who consistently, the last time I looked at numbers, it was over 70% that it went out to a world of maybe 30,000 voters in Harris County.
Oh. Did you say punch cards?
Punch cards.
Yeah.
Don Rockaby. This is an amazing story where I wish Ray Hill were here, because I can't tell it as well as he does. Don Rockaby was one of those early individuals who got into computers and systems before anyone else even knew what they were. And he developed a punch card system. It was punch cards where basically they could generate a roster of 11,000, 14,000 voters in the early 80s. And that was an amazing voter base. And by the early 80s, the organization got started in 1975. By the early 80s, individuals said in the city of Houston acknowledged the caucus as a political powerhouse.
Wow. We have shoulders to stand on top of. So what has been some of the successes that each of you experienced that the caucus was part of for our community? Meaning, like, what successes the community experienced because of the caucus when you were president, or through your experience in the organization?
Well, I can start with that real quick because I also want to mention that the organization changed its name basically 3 times. In 1975, the organization was known as the Gay Political Caucus. In 1987, it changed its name. At that point, Anise Parker, former mayor, became president, and it changed its name to the Gay and Lesbian Political Caucus, recognizing the women. And then in 2005, when I became president, one of the first things I wanted to do was make sure to make sure that the trans community was a clear part of our organization. And in 2005, we officially changed the organization's name to the Houston GLBT Political Caucus. Now, there had been attempts to include the trans community, and the stories I heard is that in the early 90s, there had been attempts to include the trans community that had not gone well. The transphobia, the resistance to adding trans to the name. Scott Simpson, a past board member of the organization, basically said he never understood the argument, but somebody made some argument that an organization should not have to change its name to add a community. He and I, he was on my board when I was president. He and I agreed that that didn't make any sense. But basically it was transphobia. And so in 2005, we finally got to the point where it was unanimously voted by the membership that the caucus would now be the Houston GLBT Political Caucus. And that's one of the proudest things I created as a president, is just changing the name, making sure it was far more inclusive. The other thing I brought to the organization is the 6:30 gathering, feeding everybody, giving them something to drink. We started that tradition when I was president because I was basically hungry and I didn't want to go through another
That's
meeting.
fair.
Yeah.
Another meeting
That's fair.
in a cranky mood.
Well, so I was president in 2009 and 2010. In 2009 is probably in the Houston history books, is when Houston became the first major city in the United States to elect a member of the LGBTQ community when Anise Parker became mayor. Sorry, elect as mayor a member of the LGBTQ community. That's something that took extraordinary focus and extraordinary discipline to have that kind of attention placed on you, and to make that kind of momentous achievement for the community. It was also, 2009 was the first year we did the Equality Brunch, which is coming up soon, and is the longest running big fundraising event in the caucus, and it's been a really successful event. I'm pretty proud of what it's become. Yeah, 2009 was a big year. I had to run in 2010 just because I was so focused in 2009 that I had to have a year just to be president by myself. So
The Equality Brunch has now become a signature event.
Yeah.
Everyone goes to it. And you check the website, we should be plugging it, right, Mike?
Yes. www.thecaucus.org.
And that signature event, what it does, and it's really, really pivotal, is it guarantees the ability of the organization to get that endorsement card mailed, and that's pivotal.
Yeah. Were there any other successes that the caucus was integral in that helped progress Houston and make our community safer?
I think, during my presidency, I'm one of the most recent presidents. I was president in 2016. And going into 2016 and 2017, we talk about the caucus as this, making sure that we are advocating in greater Houston area, being involved in elections. And for me, my presidency, I really wanted to focus on coalition building, because I felt like if we can build coalitions and show that LGBTQ people are part of every single community issue, I thought that would be key. And so I really feel like during our presidency, we were able to make an impact at not only at the local level, but really make a legislative impact and really get involved legislatively. I mean, before the 2017 legislative session, during that, our Education and Advocacy Committee had really become strong, and so there was these initiatives having this, not only when we talk about the legislative wrap-up, but having this preview. And when you looked in the room to see all of these community members coming in to learn about what is actually happening at the Texas legislature, and then during the session, we were able to fill like a full bus during spring break and take so many members at no cost to the members, getting a sponsor, being able to take the members to the Texas State Capitol so that they would be able to advocate. And from my understanding, that has happened. That happened not only that one time, but it happened during the 2019 legislative session too. So it's like this impact, locally as well as going.
Absolutely. I was not going to be the one to break tradition Fran set. I will let another president have that unfortunate experience. Our history, as you touched on, Maria, earlier, has not always been perfect.
No.
For instance, when our members voted to not include transgender people in our name. From you all's experience, how has the caucus overcome challenges to growth?
In a loud, raucous way. Any organization, especially one that is made up of, let's just say, broad, prominent, obvious personalities, leaders in the community. And in many ways, the caucus is a group of individuals, many of whom are leaders in different organizations as well as in the caucus itself. They all have diverse opinions and challenges, and their job is to challenge our society. Pretty much that's why we're all in this organization. Ray Hill famously called the caucus the Raucous Caucus because our meetings are intense. Our endorsements are intense meetings. Our latest endorsement meeting was, 8 hours long, Michael?
Yes, it was a full work day.
Did the air work?
The air worked
Okay,
perfectly.
good.
Yeah, 2015.
That was actually, 2015 was a rough year.
That was
Very difficult year.
Because the AC was out.
And it was a large crowd.
Yes.
in August.
It was equally passionate.
Yes.
But the challenges, the caucus in 1975 started off with a core group of individuals. Ray Hill says in 1977 was a pivotal moment because Anita Bryant came to basically go anti-gay to Houston, and 10,000 people came to protest her. And it was from there that other organizations started to get formed, and a recognition that the GLBT community in Houston had sort of matured, and now it was time for them to create organizations, diverse organizations, to address the myriad of challenges that the GLBT community faced in a basically homophobic, transphobic, racist society that was very much invested in an apartheid understanding of sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. To this day, we still don't have protection in the city and state. We can still be fired for who we are. We can be denied housing because we want to live with a specific person. We can be denied service because we are gay or trans, and there's no national remedy, no state remedy, and no local remedy.
Well, you know, something I hear from other politicos who are not maybe long-term members of the caucus is people say, why do y'all let people go on forever and debate forever and say whatever they want to? And why do you have such long discussions and long endorsement meetings? But I think that's really key to what keeps the caucus going, is because everyone gets the opportunity to say their piece and be heard. And through that, they have some ownership of the caucus. I mean, people walk away saying that was my organization, even if they disagreed with the decisions that were made in the room. It's a part of, they're all a part of it.
That's very true.
And Ray was famously losing the arguments, and yet he always stayed committed. And individuals were always astonished that he stayed committed. He said, I got my chance to speak. They heard me. Maybe not this time, but in the future, maybe they'll change their mind. And it's true. These are not comfortable meetings, those endorsement meetings. And they never have been. In the early 80s, it was Ray Hill who changed the rule that you could not buy your membership that day and vote that day. He was the one who added the 30-day wait period. Now, you could renew that day if in the past year you'd been a member and you'd let it lapse and vote that day. But if you were a brand new person, you had to buy your membership 30 days before. And that was because they were having raucous caucus meetings back in the 80s as well, and driving each other insane.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So basically, I've heard that we've had this very transparent and fair process that keeps our members engaged, but also what I like to think is our members understand the bigger vision that we're all fighting for, which is our lives, like equal rights for the LGBTQ plus community. So now that we have a better understanding of our more troublesome aspects or characteristics of the organization, can we talk a little bit more about how our endorsement meetings contributed to the success, like historical political successes, and why is that significant?
Well, one of the reasons the caucus is such a political power player in the city is that we put actions behind our endorsements. It's not just, here, we support you, you can slap our organization's name on your push card. We put out mail, we have volunteer efforts, we do social media, we do all sorts of outreach. People know who the caucus endorsed, and people respect who the caucus endorsed. And people make their decisions based on who the caucus endorsed. So winning the caucus endorsement can be the difference between winning or losing your election. And so that's why people care about it.
And that's become really, in very close elections, that's become very pivotal to candidates. And that's why they vie so hard for our endorsement. They recognize our process consistently. Candidates have told me our process is probably the most rigorous screening process they've ever walked into. We send them a questionnaire that you can't just write off in 10 minutes. You have to sit down and go through it. And the questionnaire, we bring in individuals. If we're doing a judicial questionnaire, we bring in the lawyers to basically make sure they understand what we need to be asking as a screening committee. And it takes a long time to fill out that questionnaire. Fran, you had that experience.
Yes, it takes a long time. And at first, when I was president, seeing it from 2 points. When I was president, and people were saying, "Oh, it's so long," I said, "Yeah, but it's, you're a candidate. You have to take the time to do this. fill out the questionnaire. This is for our community. You know, we
have
ask
no
these
sympathy.
questions. Yeah, we ask these questions because this is impacting lives. And then I took the questionnaire and I was like, wow, this question is so long. And I'm like, it's impacting lives.
So you get this questionnaire that the candidates have to take seriously. Then they have to come in for at least a half an hour to have a conversation with a pretty intense screening committee. These are members of the caucus who are committed, and it is hours and hours of screening individuals. And no one and everyone has to screen. Anise Parker, who we screened over and over and over again, when she was mayor, had to come in and get screened again because she was up for re-election, and it was just as intense. But it then goes to the membership with the recommendations of the screening committee. Scores are they're transparent. The scores and recommendations, the screening committee gets hauled up in front of the membership, and then the membership grills the screening committee. So why'd you make that call? And so even the screening committee knows that they're going to be asked, why'd you do what you did? And so, and it's a transparent, very visible process that everybody sees. And so when the decision gets made, because it is a membership that votes on the endorsement, we require, you have to raise your hand, you have to show your credential. We do not do secret ballots in the organization.
Chris, you said you had to run a second year because the first year you were working so hard. What were some of these key races that you were working on and that impact?
Well, the second year, it was a little more relaxed compared to the first year. But two of the things that I recall is we made some significant bylaws changes, and I think we'll talk about one of the leaders behind that a little later. But we also, one of the things I recall is that we passed a resolution supporting immigration reform, which was not an issue that the caucus as an organization had taken part in. And I think it was one of the earlier examples of the caucus moving past taking a position on issues that are not, don't come to mind when people talk about LGBTQ issues. And I think that was important.
That was very important, Chris, because what that meant is that the caucus was building coalition politics. I forget the current term for
Intersectional.
Intersectional political support, and it was under Chris. It was the city police officers basically becoming ICE officers, and we were very much against that. But the discussion before that decision, before the statement came out, was what is the mission of the caucus and how do we do our work? And many of us argued, and others argued against broadening our mission. Many of us argued that we had to build coalitions, because if we weren't there right now at that moment when the immigration issue came up, we could not go to the Tejano Dams and ask them to support us. So, I remember those discussions in 2010, and they got heated.
Wow. So knowing a lot about where we've come from and sort of the challenges that we have to continuously overcome, is there anything particularly that you're proud of that you see in the caucus today that you might not have expected before?
Diversity. I mean, for a long time there, the caucus, the gay political caucus, was known as the Gypsy Boys Club or some such thing. I forget what they called it. It was a lot of white men. And I guess it's really under you, Mike, and Fran, you guys really began the effort of bringing in basically just making it a priority, a verbal, documented priority of the organization to reach out and figure out how to bring in diverse communities, diverse LGBT people into our organization.
I mean, when I walked in, the first time I walked in, it was Mayor Parker, and then I got a little taste of that raucous caucus because I was like, oh, they're talking to I saw that they were members, they were passionate about, what impacts our community, but it was me and a black guy in the corner, and I said, how do we, and even before I went to the caucus, the person who brought me to the caucus said, oh, we're going to go visit the Houston GLBT Political Caucus. I had never heard of this organization.
What, your membership was bought, Fran?
So right into the caucus.
Our latest controversy.
That'll be later. That's the second half. No, but I had never, I hadn't even heard of the organization. And then he said, this organization's been around 38 years. This organization's been around 38 years. But if we don't have that information, we don't know. And so when I walked in, I said, this has got to change. And so when I was vice president, I just went anywhere I could go. I would tell people about the caucus. I really used my social media, in ways that they saw that I was able to volunteer. And so really showing that we can create a space where everyone's voices need to be heard. Because again, we're part of every single community, and if we want to impact change, if we want to move the needle, if we want to move us forward, then everyone has to be in that room, and not only be in that room, but be able to be leaders in these spaces. So yeah, I think diversity for me was major, because when you don't see someone that looks like you, I'm thinking,
Yep.
who's making all the decisions? Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess one of the things that I'm impressed with the caucus is the generational staying power of it. I came in as a young gun and was annoying to a lot of people. And recently someone referred to me as an elder statesman of the caucus.
Whoa.
Freaked me out.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
But there was real concern in 2015 when the Obergefell ruling came down. That the movement would kind of atrophy to some extent, because most people who were in the movement had gotten what they wanted at that point. So there was real concern that these kind of organizations would kind of die out, and that's the opposite of what's happened with the caucus. And part of that is because the membership has realized how many ways LGBTQ people's lives are affected, and maybe that just because I'm a gay man, another gay man may have different experiences than me, or a lesbian woman, or a transgender person, or a non-binary person.
But I also think, one of the things that the caucus has become in the city of Houston is the sustained, progressive, political voice of the city. In most cities, the progressive voice is either represented by choice or by unions. That's not true in Houston. And the staying power, you're right, that's the amazing part, is for some reason, and that's one of the things I'm actually looking at, is why the caucus and no other organization has consistently been the organization that a progressive voter turns to figure out who they're going to vote for. One of the things the caucus does is it's out at West Gray. It is known that if you forgot your endorsement card, or you haven't gotten the caucus endorsement card yet, during early vote, you need to go to West Gray, because there'll be someone there with a caucus endorsement card. People show up and ask for it. And to watch that phenomenon throughout the years, to see how the caucus, unlike other organizations, political organizations in the city, have basically created this this position that the caucus will endorse good progressive candidates. I mean, you can quibble with sometimes with who we end up endorsing, but overall, consistently, we have endorsed people who are there to help and protect the most vulnerable in our city. Very few organizations right now can claim that they've been doing it since 1975.
Well, we're moving into the second half, and I just want to remind everyone who's watching here today that you're welcome to call in, be a part of this conversation, and you can reach us and call in at 713-807-1794. Again, that's 713-807-1794.
Thank you, Fran. So we talked about the equality brunch a little bit earlier. Would you give us more information on what inspired you to start the equality brunch?
Well, it was Christina Gorczynski's idea. And this was, she was a board member in 2009. And at the time, the caucus didn't really have any kind of standing annual big fundraising event. And there was the idea that we should have something like that. But the kind of, frou-frou black tie gala had, that sphere was largely occupied by people like the Human Rights Campaign. And we kind of perceived ourselves as this kind of grassroots, dirty politics organization. And that didn't really appeal to us very much. I don't really like wearing tuxedos anyway, frankly.
I don't mind.
So Christina came up with the idea after doing some research about having a brunch. It was at the House of Blues at the time had this big brunch that they could throw you, and you just had to pay your portion, and it really wasn't very expensive at the time. And so, what's more fun than a brunch? It's certainly more fun than a frou-frou gala. It's more fun. And so, we had that on a Sunday morning, and it was a big success. Everyone had a really good time.
Yeah.
And so we did it again the next year. And then they did it again. And then it kept happening. And we're about to have our 10th one.
Yeah.
The annual one, yeah.
Yes, wow.
Well, and one of the reasons that was such a good shift is historically the way we would figure out how to pay for that caucus endorsement card is basically we'd shake down the candidates that we had endorsed. We'd endorse them, and then we'd say, we need you to empty your pockets to us so we could send the card out. And, it just seemed a little, we still ask them to do it, but now we at least give them something. We give them a nice brunch. They can be sponsors, so we give them some nice, a fun event.
Mm-hmm.
And it has really encouraged people beyond our candidates, endorsed candidates, to support the card, which is ultimately what the brunch does. Although I don't think I'm supposed to talk about that on TV. Have anyone experienced?
Well, but that's the deal. The thing about the quality brunch is that it's just not candidates who are supporting it.
Right.
It's individuals. It's the membership going in and saying, this is important. I want to buy a seat at the table.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have you all seen the brunch evolve since the first one to now we're at the 10th one?
Oh yeah, the first one was, I don't think there was any seating. I think you went to the buffet and you kind of stood around, or maybe you sat on like a high top or maybe like a couch.
Oh, wow.
And we had to bring in a little loudspeaker system because there wasn't one. No, I think it's because we had to rent it and we were cheap. And so,
That's true.
So and then we allow candidates to speak. There was the only programmatic element, and this was also Christina Gorczynski's idea, was she said, we can get more people there if we give out a couple awards, because then those people will get their people there. And that's the genesis of the awards that we give out every year. And now, it was at Zaza last year,
yes.
right? It was a huge event, huge ballroom, many, many tables, completely packed.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Whole program.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was just over the top, of course, because it was a gay brunch. Those awards were really interesting. One of the things the caucus has had its ebbs and flows. In the late 90s, early 2000s, the caucus sort of really went through some difficult times. And one of the things that happened is we lost many of the awards we used to give out. And when Ken Jones became president, 2002, Dr. Ken Jones became president. The organization would meet once a month in this house off of Hawthorne, and there'd be like 11 of us sitting around at a general membership meeting. I mean, it had really dwindled. And what Ken Jones basically inherited as president, he became the president after Deborah Bell, or not Deborah Bell, Deborah Rogers resigned as president of the caucus. Ken Jones became president, and he had a very anemic organization. So what he did is he stripped everything from the organization, and we went down to just 3 things: screening and endorsing candidates, building the list, and getting the endorsement out. And that was that. There was no brunch. There was no reception before a meeting. There were a dozen of us at many a meeting. And it slowly started to rebuild to, the fact that we have over 750 members now or some. Yeah. We've never had that number before.
Mm-hmm. We thought we were doing big things when we had 300.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right.
Yes, we did.
So you brought up the awards. They're named after specific people.
That's right.
Can we talk about who they're named after and why it's significant that we still honor them today?
Yeah.
That's
John Paul Barnidge.
John Paul Barnidge was, I didn't bring that when I was going to bring it.
He was a municipal court judge, and he was the first person from the community who was a judge in the Houston area.
Yeah. And his is the Justice,
yes.
the Justice Award.
Justice for the LGBTQ community.
That's right.
This year, Fran Watson is the recipient, and it's only because I was not at the board meeting when that was selected. But it's very fitting, though, because it's you literally following the footsteps of the person who the award is named after.
Yeah,
it's pretty awesome.
Any other?
So the Tim Brookover Award, and could you remind me? I'm sorry.
Absolutely, the Lifetime Achievement Award.
Lifetime Achievement.
Yeah, Tim Brookover was just like the nicest guy in the world, and he was the hardest worker. He was just someone who was always there. He passed away a few years ago, unfortunately. But he was just a great guy, and I think that was when he passed away. It was just, we felt like we needed to honor him, and not just honor that kind of work ethic that he had.
Yeah, he had headed the community, the LGBT community center, before it became what it is now, when it was, and during some really rough times, and he was always there, and he was always a member of just about any committee you would form. He never wanted to be president of the caucus. He was always a member, and so it's just that long-term commitment to the caucus. That's why we have the Lifetime Achievement Award. One of the other awards is the Don Rockavy Award, given to a member.
Yeah.
Don Rockavy was a guy who invented the list. He was the one who created it, sustained it. It got stolen from him a couple of times. Well, the idea actually got stolen from him, and Karl Rove ended up stealing it. I mean, it's Don Rockavy who invented it, and Karl Rove years later, who copied what we were doing, and then ended up using it against our community.
Oh my God.
Interesting history there.
Yeah.
But this year we have an awesome person. Judson is our recipient of the Don
Rockavy Award.
Yes. And the Lifetime Achievement Award is J.D. Doyle this year.
Right. J.D. Doyle.
And we also have Eleanor Tinsley Award, the ally.
She was a city council member in during the 80s and into the early 90s. She was really the first person to take the caucus endorsement and make it a part of her campaign, and she won on it. And she stayed with the community for a long time until she passed, I think, in the mid-90s.
Yeah. An important political ally who was actually in office, and back when it wasn't popular, showed off our endorsement.
That's amazing history there. That shows allyship is important.
That's right.
In our organization.
And the
in our
winner of
history.
this year's ally
It's Project Curate. Project Curate helped us so much this year, but what most people probably remember is the anti-racism training that we experienced in May, which I think is actually one of our largest meetings that we've had this year, with the exception of the endorsement meeting. And it's just so inspiring having allies like Project Curate who are very intersectional in their approach towards racial justice and LGBTQ equality, but at the same time, they see themselves as conspirators with us, right? Like they're side by side with us in this fight. And so that's why the board decided to honor them this year. I was not there.
And then we have the Kristen Capps Award.
The Kristen Capps Award,
Oh, wow. Well,
one of the most special.
Yeah.
They're all special.
as many of you know, Kristen Capps was my partner, and we suddenly lost her 2 years ago. In fact, August 21, yesterday, was her birthday. And that award goes to a member of the organization who just does work and believes in social justice. Basically, she was called the conscience of our community. She scolded a lot, and the highest ethical standards. She was an attorney, and she demanded all of us. We had to own everything we did, and we always had to do it with the highest ethical standards. Hard worker with the Caucus, a fighter for social justice. I remember how riveted we all were when she'd go up and testify for Hero, and just the most amazing arguments, just astonishing. And so yeah, a pretty special award. Yeah. And this year's recipient is?
Landon Ritchie, actually.
Oh.
Very fitting.
Yeah.
Considering we have this, and I think it's probably the first time that I remember us honoring someone who's still considered a youth.
Yeah, a youngster.
Technically under 18, but it is the maturity level of better than some of our elected officials. And I'm just excited to honor him on September 29th. You can go to www.thecaucus.org to find out more information.
Yeah, it's going to be a wonderful brunch awards event.
It's going to be amazing.
Landon Ritchie, that's terrific.
Yeah. I got a little emotional with the Kristen Capps. I never told the story before, but actually it was Jelanda Jones and Fran Watson, the reason why y'all have this headache, i.e. me, in the organization, because my first meeting, there was only 2 other black people as well. Fran was late though. It's important to note, because when I walked in, the only other black person was Jelanda Jones. And I happened to sit right next to her. And throughout my early experience in the organization, of course, we had racial challenges in our organization. And it was actually Kristen Capps who was always there to remind me, one, that not all white people are evil, but that she was intentional about making sure that we get it right. And I never saw someone use their privilege to the degree that she did for the greater good, for those she did not have to fight for in our organization. And I credit the reason why I'm still sustaining in the organization is because of Kristen Capps. And I've never said that before, but that's the reason why I'm here today. That's because when you say the Consciousness Award, that's because she was literally our conscious. Maybe that explains a lot of why things are happening the way they are now. Throughout your caucus leadership, where you served in different roles, what other roles did you serve other than being president in the organization, if any?
I always was somehow connected with the screening process.
You were the screening chair.
For many years, screening
Yeah.
chair for many, many years. I chaired the 2015 endorsement meeting when the air conditioning had broken down and there's like 200 people in a room and it was 100 degrees in there. And we were trying to decide on the endorsement of, at that point in time, Sylvester Turner was running for mayor, and it was pretty intense. But you know, screening chair is really fascinating because you have to keep those questionnaires up to date.
Yeah.
They really age. And looking back at some of the earliest questionnaires I had worked with and prepared with others, the questionnaires are just so far, I mean, dramatically more sophisticated than they were almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I was on the board before I was president, of course. And, you know, throughout the years, I've kind of served in different capacities. I've been kind of a bomb thrower at times. I've been a whip for candidates. And now, thanks to Mike, I've been kind of able to take back from that and be the parliamentarian at these big meetings, which has been nice, just because the bomb throwing and getting out there and fighting with people isn't really something I have as much of an appetite for it anymore. So it's good to kind of be the umpire.
Yeah. That's actually very true.
Yeah, I was always a cheery one. So I volunteered. I started off by volunteering. After all the hard work of the screening committee, I was out in the polls, like as a volunteer, handing out the card. And then when I joined the board, or I guess, yeah, you don't join. When I was elected to the board,
Yeah.
I was elected to the board.
And you had a contested election.
Yes, I did. I became the volunteer coordinator. Why are you bringing up history?
You got to remind folks the history.
But I was the volunteer chair. I was a volunteer coordinator, so I would work to really increase the volunteer engagement and get people out there. And that was really fun to me because you get to talk to folks and utilize all these different programs and really, if you know, when you give money, and money's always needed, right? We always need money, but when you give your time, that's really intentional. And so for people to trust this process and trust what the work that we're doing and to give their time for that, it was proud for me. So I really enjoyed doing the volunteer work.
And actually, when you were volunteer chair, we saw an uptick in our, like a huge uptick.
Yep.
Like we had more volunteers than I think, and I hate, because you know, former presidents like to remind me when something is not the best or it's not the greatest it's ever been in our history. So I hope I'm saying this accurately when I say that Friend Watson brought the higher level of volume of volunteers that we've ever experienced in our organization.
I use that social media. I'm not gonna lie. I really like my little Facebook. I was trying.
Well, and you're right about the volunteer, how pivotal that was. When I'd be calling someone to, you know, when you'd call on me and say, okay, it's time to call people to go volunteer, I said, oh, all right. And just getting on the phone, and every now and then someone would say, well, how much do you want? I say, no, I want something more valuable. I want your time. And you know, just trying to bring them in was just part of the challenge. And getting those volunteers, that's true, that's hard. And yeah, Fran, you did a good job in getting a lot of people to come out and give us a hand.
We'd have dogs out early morning.
You set the bar high, and we have not been able to meet it since.
Well, look.
Now, I think what's ultimately important for folks to remember is that, like, we're a volunteer-driven organization,
Yes.
a volunteer-run
Right.
organization.
Every level.
And there's a role for everyone, really any member who wants to serve or to contribute to the organization. And I know we're running short on time. I'm getting there, Fran.
Oh, I was just being a friendly reminder.
Knowing our history, how do you see the caucus in the future?
That's always a tough question, because you never know what's going to happen, and it'll probably happen.
That's true.
So, I mean, you know, candidates still are going to come to us, and they're going to want our endorsement, and they're going to try to figure out every way they can to figure out how to, ingratiate themselves to our good wishes, and then compete for our endorsement. Our card is influential, and it's going to continue to be influential, especially because Harris County is pretty much now a blue county, and
Progressive county.
it's a progressive county, yeah. And there's now pressure on us to expand, to go beyond Harris County, and that's hard. That's one of the challenges we are going to face, is they want us to get beyond the borders of Harris County. And that means a whole, getting information from different counties.
Expanding our database.
Finding out how to get out there, where would be a good place for us to start, handing out cards.
But those are good problems to have.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, that sounds kind of flippant, but I don't know if in 2009 I would have looked at 2019 and expected to see the room that I saw. And I don't know if I would have expected to see the issues discussed. And so it's hard for me to say, and I don't want to kind of try and put a cap on it.
I like that too.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with both Maria and Chris. I think, especially to Chris's point, is like putting a cap on it, not putting that cap on it, because what started in 2009 is making a statement on immigration, to having our president be able to stand up there, President Francis Valdez, be able to stand up and talk about the impacts of her work in immigration and protecting LGBTQ folks. We, to see that being able to be talked about, and just that's intersectional work. Like, it's the dialogue in general, like beyond the caucus, the dialogue in general. We're having to go through this, like, all of this, pruning and this growth and these tough conversations, and literally having to pull back Band-Aids in so many different areas. And so that's going to happen within an organization. If we value the diversity, if we value the growth, we're going to have those tough conversations in there. And through that, I think through the toughness, I think something greater will occur. What that greatness is, we don't know, because we're all still trying to work through all of this. So I think the caucus, the future of the caucus is continuing to be open, continuing to let growth happen, and just sky's the limit.
Yeah, and trying to remain as transparent as historically we always have been. It's always a challenge. We have once a month membership meetings. The board meets once a month. There's social media now, so everything is visible, and the interpretations are diverse. One of the challenges right now is we do need more women in the organization. We need to bring more of the trans community into the organization. We still are a challenged organization in terms of getting our community back in, and those are the things that the board has to figure out. But it's not just the board; it's the membership has to take ownership. The big controversy right now is the fact that candidates can and do buy block memberships. Some members find it unacceptable. Well, we're now in the process of, okay, so how are we going to figure this out? What's the answer? The good thing is that the caucus has a system in place to address its issues. And, with Chris as chair of the Rules Committee, he's got a system in place where we can hear from the membership. And just doing that kind of work, and I've always argued that getting buy-in, not necessarily agreement, but buy-in requires being able to hear everyone. And that's the buy-in. They're not going to get what they want. Most time, nobody gets everything they want. But at least we heard them and they got to make their point and try to convince others to agree with them. The vote might not be with them. And that's been part of the success of the organization, is that the buy-in is they were heard.
I think in this last minute that we have, why don't we hear from our current president? What is something that you see? What is something you're proud of, or where do you see this caucus going? Pick whichever you'd like to answer.
Oh, thank you, Fran, for that. I would say that very quickly, my first meeting, I think we were debating, and I say we now, but I wasn't a member then. We were debating whether to pressure Mayor Anise Parker to open up HERO to be applicable to all residents and entities throughout Houston, and not just those that work for the city. And it was a very passionate, it was a raucous caucus meeting. And literally, I was just dared to yell at folks for not doing anything about HIV and AIDS for Black and Latinx gay men, in my opinion, at that time. And that was many years ago now. And I came into people yelling at each other. But what I thought was beautiful about that moment was they were yelling about our rights and how much we should push our rights. And then when everyone voted, they voted to, yes, pressure Anise Parker to make it applicable to everyone, to all of us. What I saw afterwards was the most beautiful thing I never saw in an organization before. Somehow people weren't angry anymore. Somehow the question was, so how can we make this happen?
Wow.
What's the best way to make this happen all together?
Wow. What a way to end it. Well, I just want to thank the panelists for being here to have this wonderful history lesson and talking about the impact, this impact for the LGBTQ community in Greater Houston. And thank you, Maria, thank you, Chris, and thank you for really running this dialogue, Mike. I just appreciate knowing that the leadership that is continuing on in this caucus will really set the tone kind of going forward. So good night, everybody, and thanks for watching.